Welcome to our information session on sharing e-CMR data with help of ISHARE. Today, Barry van Leuven of Pionira, Hans Tochtema of Collect and Go, and Peter Jaspersen of the ISHARE Foundation will lead us through the digital process of signing off on the handover of goods. Barry van Leuven is one of the driving forces behind Belgian solution provider Pionira, supporting organizations in their digitization efforts. He is also founder and chairman of DigiTransit. Hans Tochtema is an expert in digitizing freight documents within logistics and founder of Collect and Go. Hans is also a member of DigiTransit, working on interoperability and business-to-government interaction. Peter Jaspersen has a track record of over 30 years in international transport and logistics. Peter is currently active as a program manager for ISHARE, the International Trust Framework for Data Sharing. Before handing the word to our experts, a few notes on today's session. This session will be recorded and will be available afterwards via the website of the Top Sector Logistiek. We will share the link afterwards for your convenience. Please mute your microphone, and if you're experiencing problems with your bandwidth, also make sure that your camera is not active. If you have any questions, feel free and please use the chat functionality. As a moderator, I will monitor the chat box and find a suitable moment to break into our team of experts to raise your question there. Should we not find a suitable moment within the presentation today, or simply not have the time to add all the answers to the questions in the session, we will make sure to provide a proper follow-up afterwards. Also afterwards, we will present all the presentation slides to you via an email. And should you have any questions regarding the themes of e-CMR or data sharing with ISHARE, feel free to contact us on info@ishareworks.org afterwards. My name is Joost Kolen. I'm a program manager ISHARE and your moderator today. Peter, I'm handing over to you for an introduction to ISHARE.
Yeah, Joost, thank you very much for the introduction. As mentioned, my name is Peter Jaspersen. I'm working for the ISHARE team. And what I would like to do is to give you a little bit of background about ISHARE and what ISHARE is. And then I think that's important because then later on you understand also the benefits of ISHARE in this digital waybill case. It's good perhaps to start with ISHARE in a nutshell, because I can imagine that not everyone is familiar with ISHARE. It's good perhaps also to tell what it's not. So ISHARE is not a platform, or it's not a system in itself. ISHARE is a uniform set of agreements or a scheme, and companies can use that to access their data in a standardized way. And the main part of that standardization is around identification, who are you, authentication, about how do you know that that's the right person or the right company, and authorization, what are you allowed to do with the data. So if companies use the ISHARE scheme, use the ISHARE network, they can indeed agree and make share data without having new bilateral data access between systems. What we have seen and what we have learned during the last years is that organizations encounter common barriers to share data. One of them is, as always, a costly and time-consuming integration. A lot of companies work at this moment with EDI connections, and every time they have a connection with the system or with the platform, they have to agree about identification, who are you, authentication, how can you prove that, and authorization, what are you allowed to do with my data. We all know that within logistics, but also in other sectors, there are lots of systems in operation, like warehouse management systems, transport management systems, ERP systems, planning systems. And when you have a new customer or a new supplier or a new transport provider, you still need to go through that integration process. And ISHARE makes that in an easier and more practical way. One of the other common barriers is the lack of trust. It's also about who can see my data. Who's the owner of the data on a platform? How can I retain control over my data? Who has access to that data? So that's something that you have to agree as well. And these common barriers are barriers that ISHARE likes to solve. ISHARE likes to remove these barriers, and with the costly and timely consuming integration, ISHARE offers a standardized way for that identification process, authentication process, and the authorization, not only machine to machine, but also human to machine. And the ISHARE participants, they implement the same method for that IAA process, and they do not need to make a bilateral agreement every time when they want to share data. And about the lack of trust in data sharing, ISHARE has covered that and offers a solution by a set of functional, technical, operational, and legal agreements, and all the ISHARE participants comply with these agreements. So they can hold each other also to the agreement they have with the ISHARE scheme owner. When can ISHARE be of added value to you? There are 4 situations that ISHARE can offer additional value. One of them is that ISHARE offers a standard way for that identification authentication process. So it's a connector, an ISHARE connector. Let's share it like that. And you don't need to make a tailor-made connection anytime. The moment that you like to connect with another partner that's part of the ISHARE network, you can use the same method for that IAA process. The second point that is very useful is that you can delegate sharing data with someone else. As an example, you are, for instance, a supplier, and you like to share data with one of your customers, for instance, and one of the trucking companies that you appointed like to connect with that customer to pick up a freight. Within ISHARE, you can indeed delegate a subcontractor like a transport company to request data from a customer, for instance, when he or she can pick up a freight from a warehouse. So the delegation process increases your efficiency. You don't need to have a lot of email correspondence. It can be a machine-to-machine communication, but you know for sure that's the right partner due to the fact that you have that IAA process in place. You can also share data up and down a supply chain. So if you have a supply chain network with suppliers, logistics providers, for instance, transport companies, warehouse partners, you can share data with all these partners if they are also part of the ISHARE network. So even with companies that you don't know at this moment, but they're still in your supply chain, and they're still, for instance, part of that supply chain and also a member of the ISHARE network, you can easily share data within that supply chain. Another one that is very important is that you can share data under very specific conditions. So you can request data, but also give instructions about receiving data, for instance, for a specific period. So you can say, you can only use this data for 1 month. Or as a receiver of my data, you are not allowed to share this data. Or perhaps you like to do it the other way around. You can share this data as, for example, a transport company like to share data with another transport company. So you can share instructions to pick up a freight, and then you can arrange that in your conditions, you can allow this first trucking company to share an instruction to pick up freight with the second company, if they're both, of course, member of the ISHARE network. ISHARE supports different functionalities. What you see here on the left is the machine-to-machine, what we already discussed. There's also the flexible authorization, what I mentioned. So coarse-grained broad authorization is, for instance, that you can share data for a specific period, for a month, or perhaps you like to have an e-CMR platform provider that you use for a few months or for a year. But it can also be very fine-grained. So you can come up with a specific authorization. That means you have an authorization for sharing data about one digital waybill document, for instance, or one specific container. So that means that you can be specific about what data do you like to share with others within your network. The delegation part we already discussed, so you can delegate someone else. And on the right hand, you see there's also the option that you can communicate and share data human to machine. Within the ISHARE scheme, there are different roles, and one of these roles is, for instance, an identity provider role. And the identity provider can be a customer, or it can be an entity that checks and guarantees the identity of a person. So an identity provider within the ISHARE scheme can, for instance, offer portable identities and also the option for single identity for access to systems or access to platforms. So people can then log in with that portable identity based on their ISHARE network. So you know who that person is. A very important point as well is that you stay in control as a customer. So you can allow different parties within your network to modify the access rights to data, but also the right to services. So you can change that, and you can not only change the time for 1 month or a week or for a specific shipment, but you can also select partners within that ISHARE network to give access rights or not, to change the access rights. So you keep in control about your data. Just the steps you need to take if you like to implement ISHARE. What do you need to do if you want to become part of that ISHARE network? There are 2 steps. One of these steps is the technical part of it, and that is implement an API, implement the program interface. And that API is based on the identity, authentication process, and the authorization process. The other step for the implementation is to sign an agreement. So you sign an agreement with the scheme owner of ISHARE, and that belongs to the ISHARE Foundation. It's a non-profit organization. And within that agreement, there are terms and conditions about the functional, technical, operational, but also legal agreement. And based on the fact that participants, if they all sign the legal agreement, they can hold each other also to that agreement, which creates within the ISHARE network a network of trust. So that are the 2 steps to implement ISHARE and become a member of the ISHARE network. Hans, I would like to hand over the presentation to you to get more into detail with the digital waybill and how you set the digital waybill up in combination with ISHARE.
Thank you very much, Peter. And my name is Hans Tochtema, founder of Collect and Go, and have a broad experience in supply chain. And 6 years ago, we started as a company on our journey to digitize freight documents, and yeah, we are well underway. And see that if you look at what we are doing, our main business is data sharing between different organizations. And what you see there is that there are a few hurdles to get digitization going. And in the beginning, the biggest hurdle in that was rules and regulations. I think in 2016, I think there were hardly any countries where you could apply across the border in a digital way. But you see that during 2018 and 2019, there has been an enormous uptake of digital accreditation by local governments, because this is still, every country has to put the rules and regulations in place for that specific country to allow digital ways of working. And our core business is e-CMR, the digital waybill for road transportation. And you see that during 2019 and also in 2020, a lot of countries ratified the e-CMR protocol. So if you look at 2019, countries like the UK, Portugal, Romania, and Poland ratified. And during this year already, Sweden, and on 11th of June, Norway also ratified. So this means that the whole Nordic region towards the east, a lot of countries, and also towards the south, that there is a the biggest hurdle is no longer there, and so that means that digitization is a no-brainer. The only country that is important to watch, I think, is Germany, when they will ratify. The expectation there is that maybe end of this year, beginning of next year, that ratification will take place, and then basically we have a European digital market. Alongside this, there's also EFTI as a development, whereby from a European Union perspective, the digitization in 2025 is mandatory for all European countries. So yeah, you can expect that by the end of 2025, or maybe a little bit earlier, that the whole European market is digital. And that's our core business in what we're doing. So if you look at other hurdles that we still face, and then of course one is technology, but this hurdle is also going towards the background, and we will go a little bit more into depth on that. And basically, what you see now in what we're what we're doing in our projects is that the only thing to think about is how to get the acceptance in your supply chain. So how to get the implementation going, involve your customers, or involve your supply chain partners, your logistics service providers, to get projects like this going. So it's more a matter of doing, and the technology is there to facilitate and enable this. And in this, we have taken the initiative to get the technology organized even between competitors. And we are both founding fathers of DigiTransit, and that's where interoperability comes in. Buddy, I would like to hand over to you to talk a little bit more about interoperability and DigiTransit.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Nice to join this presentation and the webinar. Thank you, ISHARE, for setting up this settlement. Like I said, my name is Barry van Leuven. I'm founder of Pionira, and I like to help logistics to get away with paper and going on a digitally way, and a very large perspective, not only from the e-CMR. We started in 2009 with the first data sharing platform specifically for e-documents, and now we are integrated more than the data. It's more than you're creating a document. We're integrating to your yard management, IoT solutions, and everything. If you have data, the most important thing in logistics for data and collaboration to each other is collaboration himself, partnerships with other providers, with other IT solutions, because it's enrichment of data, and therefore you have collaborating partners, you have competitors, and therefore we started with the idea, okay, we can go alone to market, but in the new way of working is IT, it's more than just a pure client server application. We are working in the cloud. You can make the comparison with mobile phones. You all have a mobile phone. We all have different providers, but we don't need to get for every provider a specific SIM card and a code. You can use your smartphone with your provider X, and you can call to a partner, colleague, a friend who is connected to another telephone provider. It's similar with digitalization and logistics. Everybody is using, the most of the partners using their own IT environment, the backend systems, the DMS systems, the YMS systems, the SAPs, name it, and they're collecting data. Collaboration of data will means enrichment of data and not typing over and any more data. But then you have a new block, a new issue. What happens if a partner in the logistic chain is using another provider, by example, for the e-CMR? And therefore, we taught and brought out the idea of DigiTransit. It's a community, it's a consortium where it's an open consortium where we allow to add as many partners as possible. We are active in Europe, so we want to create a European, and even if it's possible, going further to a global consortium where partners, e-CMR providers, competitors, IT service providers can work together. And there the idea is to make a single window to exchange data to the government and exchange data between partners. And therefore, we were looking in the market and we found a very good sustainable partner as iShare to work between as a moderator between two providers. And the first setup we always created between House Collect and Go and Pionira, and now it's the goal to set up with every consortium partner an integration setup by using the iShare partner, where we can delegate and work together on a safe environment to hand over the signatures and the information between two stakeholders, two CMR providers. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, and what we're organizing in that, and that's the term I think to what was described by Buddy, is we call that interoperability, because what is needed, the telecom industry is I think a very good example, but also the banking industry is a good example where things work in the background because parties and solution providers are working together to organize it for their truck drivers, for their warehouse employees to get things going, and that it always works during the daily operation. And that's what we want to get in place, that it functions and our solutions function wherever you are in the field. And that means that we are talking about interoperability, and we are by definition not talking about one standard, because we don't believe in a global standard or one solution that fits all, because the IT landscape is too fragmented for that. It's an international market, and it's much more about interoperability and how things work, how systems and platforms work together. We will see, I think, some kind of standardization towards the government authorities, and that's where, for instance, EFTI kicks in. So in that area, we are expecting standardization, but on the business side, the system landscape is so fragmented from bespoke legacy systems to SAP and TMS systems. So you need to have an adoption model. Every provider needs to have an adoption model that understands that landscape. And also iShare fits in very neatly in, I think, in that. So as a hub for linking systems. So that's what will form in the following years. So the interoperability makes it easier to work together and to get adoption on e-CMR. And we see especially the signing process for e-CMR as a very important area to get the adoption of e-CMR going in the market, because warehouses are not do not want to work with 25 platforms. They want to have one process for their warehouse that also works when a truck driver comes in via another platform, and that's what we're talking about here. So for this matter, what we did, we put a prototype in place where Collect and Go and Pionira are launching the technology and the message structure to handle the first cross-platform e-CMR transactions. And in that, we're unique in the market, and we have clear value add for shippers, transportation companies, and receivers.
Hans, thank you so far. There's a question from the audience. So if we look at the usage of e-CMR and the number of electronic transactions on a monthly basis, for example, what type of figures would we be looking at? And what is the growth trajectory towards the future, do you foresee?
Yeah, good question. And it differs by country. And it's also, I think we're in the early stage development of this market. If you look at the total European market, we estimate the number of transactions in this market around 3 billion a year. And the markets that are furthest in digitization are probably the Benelux, because that's, I think, where the development of solutions and the registration of those solutions started earliest. And you see that this is still, if you look at the Rogers curve, 2.5% of the innovative companies are now starting to apply this. And so this means that I think in January there was a publication in Belgium that there were 5,000 transactions for that month in the Belgian market. I think the Dutch market is big, maybe a bit bigger, but not very much, I would expect. And the other European countries are also in the first adoption model. So I think I would expect it to be somewhere around the 10 to 50,000 a month on a running basis now in the Benelux, which is still, of course, a very small fragment of the total market. So we expect that in the coming 2-3 years that you will see an adoption to 20 to 30% of the market would be my estimate. And yeah, and we're building up those first transactions and the interoperability in that. I hope that answered the question. Maybe, Buddy, you've got something to add, maybe from Spain or other markets. What are the developments there? Would you expect?
As we are active in 26 countries, we see some differences. Spain is a very active market. You have to make, if you go and you look at the charts of COVID, where you have an enormous breakout of the COVID, there's the same graphic we've got with the adoption of e-CMR. Because let's be honest, COVID, Corona it's enormous, it's dramatic, but the only positive thing it brought is that the digitalization is going an enormous high level. We have a growth in 3 months of 30% on European level. So if we look very important, and it's Spain, France, Belgium, because if you by using the electronic consignment note, e-CMR, e-documents, whatever it is, then you can by contactless signing, you have more security of the drivers. The physical interaction between people, you get away with it. They want to have protection. So we will see, and I hope that it's still growing, and the numbers, the figures are very positive about. We are not get away of Corona and COVID the next coming weeks, months of years. So I think that will have an impact on the growth by using digitalization on European level. And let's hope it's growing out of Europe as well.
Yep. And,
thank you.
yeah, and
let's get into the specifics of the interoperability solution that you've figured out, and then maybe afterwards we should look into the matter of scalability, because that seems to be very critical in what you guys are saying. So let's see the solution then.
Yeah. Buddy, do you want to kick off with the basic e-CMR process outlined here?
Yeah. So at our side, the part, we have standard APIs. Our customer on European base signed up the contract. We set up the technical parts in scale out, start on semi-manual, digitally, fully manual by integration of APIs. So we will receive from different stakeholders at our side the incoming order. So enrichment of the information. We are collecting the data on our data sharing platform of Pionira, and on basis on receiving information, real-time information, GPS location, name it, we are collecting and creating the documents. Not only the e-CMR, PODs, and all the information, and at the moment, in thinking on legal aspects, on the moment the truck is fully loaded, then the driver receives on his smartphone, on the app of Pionira, his instructions. So then he can open the app, fill in his security code, and then he receives his workflow, what to do. Are all the goods aboard? Yes, accepted. Are you arrived? Yes. Do you have problems? No. Are you damages? No. If you have one, please notify and take a picture. Have you returnables? Yes or not, and so on and so on. So we help, and this is another amazing part, because otherwise you have language barriers, and by using an app, you have 35 different languages. The driver has fast lanes, and the receptioning of the data and the goods can be done in his truck. So he's following up all the flows he has to do in his app, and then he is on the road. So he picks up the good. There will be by shipper and transport company a signing and digitally signing. No sign and glass, very important. Don't use sign and glass between shipper and transport company, because it's not allowed. So we do it by QR code, a little bit the same what you do by banking. So there is no issue, there is no problem. Both companies have a QR code on paper. You can send it through by email, like you create your voucher when you take an airplane, and you can print it out, or you can send it to your wallet, or the driver has his own app, because this is mandatory, and then he scans the QR code. So the digitally signing between two parties, shippers and transport company, has been done. Both are agreed, both have the necessary information, and then we can go on the road and deliver the goods to the consignee. So we go into the border of Belgium, then we cross the border, and then we go direction the consignee, and the consignee is using collect and go. So in the meantime, we send, if we have all collected data, to iShare, and then we have to wait when the driver appears to the consignee, and then we go over to collect and go.
Yeah, and very important here, Barry, you're already stressing that basically there are 3 signing moments, and if you change over from your paper process to a digital process, the barrier is raised for data quality and also on the signing processes. And what is very important, and Barry already stated that in the ratification for the e-protocol, it is stated that you have to be able to track down the transaction to the natural person. And that's a very important thing, because nowadays everybody signs the paper document without identifying themselves. But in the digital process, it is important to identify the specific person that did the sign off. And that's very important on the shipper and transportation company end. It's less important on the consignee end, but also there you see that data security issues, etc. It's more and more companies like Ahold, etc., are raising the bar there. So it's important to get this going, to be in front as a company and not to lag behind. So if you look then at what did we do, we've put out a prototype, and that starts with on the Pionira side. Barry, I will hand over to you, and I will click through.
Okay, so it starts with data we collect for creating the documents. For example, for here, we creating the e-CMR. On the moment the driver receives, like I told you, the goods were on board, they will do the checking, the necessary accomplishments between shipper and transport company will be done, and then the driver needs to be signed, and the shipper as well. So there's a little bit what you're doing when you're using of transferring money by using an app. It doesn't matter which bank you are connected to. By using the apps with the interoperability, There is between the banks, there is short of ISHARE as well, who's collecting the data and controlling the data. So partners, opponents, competitors can work with each other without knowing the information of the security, to accept the security reasons and fulfillments. So they stand up, they create, they sign up on a digitally way by using QR codes, for example, and then he goes on the road.
Yeah, and then it goes on the road, and the receipt is then done on the collect and go side. And what is important to understand here, the Pionira platform and the collect and go platform are both certified platforms by the government authorities. So we've gone through the audits on our technology, and the government authorities have accredited our processes. So we know that that we have trusted users on both ends. That's very important, because then if we have both trusted users on our platforms, then that means that we can allow each other to sign transactions, because we can share our identities in a secure way, and that's, I think, where the scalability kicks in, to have on the receiving end the collect and go platform, where, for instance, if you look at the portal login process, where the receiver works with the technology of collect and go, and at that moment, when a driver comes in on the Pionira transaction, then the warehouse employee can ask for, okay, what's the transaction? Let me have a look. Okay, I see that the goods are correct. I can now sign in my environment in the way I am used to process transactions. So you don't need additional training on new applications, etc. And at that moment, it is we send back the identity and the sign-off of the e-CMR. We can do that either by PIN code or with QR code, and then that's secure identity is transferred over. And then you see that the sign-off message goes back to Pionira. And what is important in this process is the remarks part, because if there are remarks, it is, from a legal point of view, it's important to put the remarks in place if there is damage, or if there is something that needs to be communicated. The name is, of course, important, because you have to track down to the natural person. And we also put in additional security. We do a check on, is this user known to this specific address? If yes, then it is accepted. And this is a prototype. So what will be, of course, the next steps is, what else can we add with our customers to get security up, or get additional functionality in place, to get signing processes that are smart and very sophisticated on processing transactions. So, for instance, a very good use case we see is in chemics, how to put in place checks for, are people allowed to unload a certain cargo, for instance. And that's where I think ISHARE comes also in around the corner, because that enables us to reach out to other identity providers or other solution providers who can put their data and link their data to the processes we are facilitating. And so for instance, a port system could have a very important role to get the access processes going, for instance. So that's what we see as a very powerful and scalable model to move forward.
Hans, I want to add some information why ISHARE, because they are a trust between the different stakeholders and the different e-CMR providers. What's very important, because in the market we are competitors, but on the moment we work together, we need some trust party who can on a trust environment handle information from one data sharing platform to the other. And therefore, there you will see in the future, in the past, a lot of companies using EDI, and with every stakeholder, you have to create an EDI. And that they were saying, okay, EDI is a standard, but I never seen one standard EDI. So if you can create a trust by building just one connection, it's sustainable. It's a trust. It's the security of, if you're updating your application at your side and you only have to maintain one API structure, or if you have to maintain a different spaghettis of EDIs. Therefore, it's very important that the sharing of data and collaboration with partners will be in the future as major important to work with each other in data sharing, and not inventing the wheel again of you have some data, I will create the same. So you will upbuild with existing data in a total solution platform what happens in the air without any doubts of it.
And Barry, to add to that, what you also see today is that we put a lot of data security agreements in place, but those are static arrangements. And I think with iShare, that then we have the possibility to have a dynamic way of organizing this, where companies can say, okay, I allow access on a very granular basis. If the world changes tomorrow and I work with different solution providers, then I can switch providers on or off, and it makes it much more dynamic instead of going into the specific agreements and checking of agreements going forward. So there's a lot of scalability and there as well. So that's what we already see happening there.
Not only scalable, it's flexible as well, and the flexibility is very important because you have to handle very quickly in transport and logistics. You cannot say, okay, I'm now building up the one solution, I'm building up the next solution. It's like plug and play. You can take it out and go in. So you don't, API structures are very flexible to handle very fast and very stable.
Yeah, which may be frightening to certain technology providers, but we'll see how that works in the future.
Gentlemen, following your discussions, there's a question coming in regarding maybe the future proofing of the solution and some future functionalities. Will this also allow you to, let's say, implement things like separation of duties or authorizing against specific qualifications, maybe even having audit trails behind this?
Yeah, I think that's where the real value add is of what we're doing here, and I think that we're raising the bar ourselves with the personal identification, so the secure signing process. That's what the e-CMR platforms do themselves. But as an add-on to that, I can imagine that you want to check whether permits are available or qualifications are available, and you can link that to the signing processes. And that makes it, I think, very powerful.
We go even further. We are working on a very large program where we have transmigrants, so entering the transports. So it's in a very high cost if you have to take away. Last week, 8 people coming from Congo, and there are weeks in trailers, so we have to take it away. It's a mess. So with IoT solutions like smart locks and IoT solutions like Sensolus or Sensor for open, closed, waiting breachers, name it, you can combine this information in the data settings. And yes, okay, therefore we can provide an audit trail. Where was the truck last night? Was he on a secure parking, or was he off the road and somewhere sleeping somewhere else? When it's in a protected area or not, then you can make instructions to security and entrances to gates, even with governments, where they don't have to stop every truck a site away to check him out. If we have smart solutions aboard, you can say, okay, nothing happens, we can see it, okay, go away. So you can create fast links and fast interactions that helps us all to get to a better solution in digitalization.
Yeah. So So there's a lot of use cases you can identify, I think. The important thing is to get this going. So on a use case like this for cross-platform signing, we would love to have the first customers putting it in place. We're talking to quite a few to get this going. But if in today's group, if there are people who see this as an important development going forward, we'd like to get in contact and to see if we can get this going with you guys. So that's an invitation from our side. The technology is there. Let's get it to work. I think. And what we're doing, for instance, on how this works with iShare, I'm taking it from the collect and go perspective. What we're going through to get this organized is, first of all, we sign the agreement with ISHARE. Peter already introduced that earlier in his presentation. That's the first step. Second step then is to add a government identification certificate. In the Netherlands, this is what they call PKI overheid, which is a authentication certificate. And this proves that in our communication that we are collect and go, so that Pionira knows, okay, this is a safe and trusted platform, government certified, and I can trust the blue eyes of Hans. That's actually what is organized in that with that certificate. And then the third step in getting iShare integrated is to get the endpoints in place for sharing of data between market operators and sharing of data between government with government consumers, government authorities, and that's the endpoint certification that we go through in the CTT. And Barry, I think this process looks more or less the same on your end, I think, except for the certificates applied in Belgium.
Absolutely, we fully agree, and nothing to add. It's yeah, because we're in a Benelux structure, so we know Europe is looking at us, and I don't mean as a company, but us as Benelux to set up and to create standards, and then they will do the rollout. So how better we perform, how better we can grow, and faster introduction to the rest of Europe. So yes, same structures.
Yeah, maybe adding one thing from my moderator perspective for the international audience, the PKI overheid certificate that Hans mentioned is the Dutch compliance certificate of the eIDAS standard, which is the prerequisite for the iShare framework. So any eIDAS compliant certificate of the high security level is the right identification method, machine to machine, within the iShare framework.
And then this is basically, we're putting the trust stamp between platform to platform, machine to machine communication in place. So that's it from the prototype we've been setting up. I'd love to get in touch with companies that have an interest to bring this forward. And Peter, I'd like to hand over to you again.
Yeah, Hans, thank you very much. And Barry, thank you very much as well. A very good explanation about how that process works. You also indeed mentioned the additional value of iShare in this process. What we have seen now is that both providers, both Pionira and Collect2Go, use iShare for that identification process, and also with eIDAS for the authentication process. And even for the customers, but also between their platforms, the authorization process, what are you allowed to do with the data on a platform? You also can use iShare for the reliable known identities for login to systems, the iShare login for the systems or for the platforms. And what we already mentioned and what Joost also explained is the role of the eIDAS certificate for that authentication process. That's used in Europe, and indeed what Joost already mentioned, we have a similar eIDAS in the Netherlands, which is called PKI overheid. What's also useful in this case is that iShare provides explicit instructions about the conditions under which data can be changed. For instance, if you as a shipper in the near future, you like to use different platform providers for e-CMR, for digital waybills, and you have different providers, for instance, in different countries, you can share these instructions if you exchange data with these providers. So make sure that you work with another provider, for instance, in a specific country in Europe. So you are flexible to use different operators and different platforms. But still with iShare, with that IAA process, you're sure that the information will reach the right platform. It also enables you to delegate to subcontractors, something that we did not touch upon yet, but what could be a next step in this case, for instance, is as a shipper that you can delegate information to a subcontractor, and the subcontractor could be an e-CMR platform provider. So you have then the option as a shipper to have an agreement with different e-CMR providers, but you can delegate to them that they are allowed to exchange data with other e-CMR providers in other countries. So then also that part of identification and authorization process can be in place between a shipper or a transport company for using different e-CMR platform providers, for instance, in Europe. So it enables sharing of this data from digital waybill in a very easy, but also very secured way and in a controlled manner, which hopefully also opens the opportunities for the near future. If we can round up more or less in the conclusion, I think this is a very good example that Pionira and Collect2Go are offering interoperability for e-CMRs. iShare in this role enables sharing of this e-CMR data in a very secure manner and on a controlled manner. So you know as an user of e-CMR, if you are a shipper or you're a transport company, that your data will be secure on these platforms and between these platforms. So you are still in control over your own data. I think also the conclusion that hopefully this is a very future-proof data exchange process to enable a scale-up. I think Hans already mentioned that there are still a lot of room for improvement and improve and increase the use of digital waybills in Europe. And this could be a future-proof process to scale that up. And also what is mentioned by Barry, that COVID could indeed be, with all the disadvantages, of course, and all the problems, could indeed be also a trigger for companies to say, we like to start with digitization and we like to move away from the paper CMR documents and move into a digital waybill. Joost, I'd like to hand over as a moderator the word to you to round up perhaps, and to also share some additional information where that can be found. And perhaps there's some questions from the audience as well.
Yep, I think it would be good to round up with a couple of the questions that have come in towards the end. So we've talked a good 50 minutes about the advantages and the benefits of both the digital waybill through means of e-CMR, as well as the interoperability and scalability with the help of iShare. The million-dollar question that came in is understanding the value now. What actually is the cost associated to stepping into this digitization process and reaping the benefits of both solutions together?
Yeah, what you can
do you like to start first?
Yeah, what you can say, it depends, of course, on the scale of application. So typically what you see is that you have a setup where you have to understand how systems are organized and how you set this up. So that's the setup part. And then typically you go into, once the setup is finished, then you go into the run model, and run is on our end is support and transaction based, and that's based on how many transactions are done on a yearly basis. And I think in most of the e-CMR platforms operate a similar model like that, or some kind of the same model. That's, I think, every company has its own pricing structures in place for that. So that's mostly part of the negotiation and part of the how to get this going with the customers. And the iShare part is, but that's something for Peter to add. Maybe important to add here the interoperability part, so the signing part. That is, there are no cost at that charge for that at the moment, because basically the transactions are paid. We don't know how this will move forward, because I can imagine that in bank transactions there are also charges or something like that between parties, but that's not something that is organized at the moment. Or so for now, we provide that to the market.
Yeah, for iShare, that's good to mention that iShare as a non-profit foundation, it's supported at this moment by the Dutch government for infrastructure and water management. It's the intention that it can be used for free for the upcoming months, but that's still depending a little bit indeed of the support that we receive from the Dutch government for this. But it's based on perhaps costs, not only just for costs. So it's not a profit-driven support way.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Barry, anything to add?
Yes, just well, we started from 2009 with the idea pure on transactional base. The platform and the app is for free, because otherwise, smaller and bigger structures, that doesn't matter for us. We just invoicing on the end of the month, pure what you have done on transaction. This pure transaction-based solution.
All right, thank you for providing those insights as well as all the others in the past hour. I'd like to spend the closing notes on putting the audience to attention of the different areas where information can be found. There's information on iShare as the trust framework. There's information to be found on DigiTransit as the interoperability group, and the individual e-CMR providers, Pionira and Collect and Go. As mentioned, we will share the presentation of today, so all these contact points and information resources can be found in there. For now, we would like to thank you for your attention and hope to greet you on one of the future information sessions that we will hold, either on the e-CMR, on iShare, or at the Top Sector Logistics. Thank you for today, and have a good day.
Thank you very much as well.
Thank you.
Have a nice day. Bye.